After living in China for more than 20 years, I've noticed something that I don't think many foreigners talk about. We usually describe China as a traditional patriarchal society, and if we look at politics, business, or the heads of large companies, that's a perfectly reasonable conclusion. Most positions of public power are still held by men, so on the surface, China certainly looks patriarchal. But the longer I live here, the more I start wondering if that's only half the story. Because when you step inside ordinary Chinese families, the balance of power often looks very different. So today I'd like to ask a slightly provocative question. Is China a hidden matriarchy? Now, before anyone gets upset, I'm not saying China is literally a matriarchy. I'm simply talking about something I've observed after living here for more than 2 decades, and I'm curious whether I'm right to think so. Let's start with what I think is the biggest difference. Public power versus private power. Publicly, men are often the face of authority. They're the politicians, the company owners, the factory managers, but inside many families, women often have enormous influence over everyday life. They decide how the household runs. They manage the monthly budget. They organize the children's education. They decide what gets bought, where the family travels, and often even influence the bigger financial decisions. Of course, every family is different, but this is a pattern I've noticed again and again. Interestingly, surveys in China have found that wives often have more influence over everyday household spending, while major purchases are commonly decided together or sometimes by husbands, suggesting that family decision-making is more nuanced than the simple label of patriarchy might suggest. I actually like to think of it this way. The husband is often the CEO of the family. His main responsibility is earning money, thinking about long-term plans, making investments, and solving the big problems. But the wife is the chief operating officer. She makes sure everything actually works. She knows what's in the fridge, what needs repairing, when the bills need paying, what the children need for school, and whether it's a really good idea to spend money on that new gadget you've been looking at online. Without the COO, the CEO wouldn't last very long. And to be honest, that's not very different from my own family. In our case, I'm mostly responsible for earning money and thinking about the bigger picture. I'm always thinking about new projects, filming videos, planning the future, trying to increase our family's income. My wife, on the other hand, runs almost everything else. She's in charge of the household budget. She keeps track of what we spend. Baby, how much did we spend this month?
You don't want to know.
Yeah, that's probably true. She usually knows whether we can afford something or whether it's better to wait. She remembers all the little things that I would almost certainly forget. If I'm honest, our family would probably become rather chaotic if she left me in charge of everything for a month. So when I talk about this, I'm not pointing fingers at Chinese families. I'm describing something that also happens in my own home. One thing I absolutely love is that Chinese people even joke about this. You'll often hear a husband say 家里领导, which literally means the leader at home. It's a humorous way of referring to his wife. A man might say 我得问一下家里领导, which means I need to ask the boss at home first. Another very common expression is 老婆说了算, which basically means my wife has the final say, or whatever my wife says goes. I think that's brilliant. These expressions are obviously jokes, but like many jokes, they're funny because there's usually at least a little bit of truth behind them. Another thing that fascinates me is the role of mothers in China. Chinese mothers often have an incredible amount of influence over their children's lives. They make decisions about schools, after-school classes, hobbies, university choices, and sometimes even relationships. Then years later, many of those mothers become mothers-in-law. Traditionally, a young bride enters her husband's family with relatively little authority, but over time, she could become one of the most influential people in the household. So perhaps power in Chinese families isn't simply about whether you're a man or a woman. Sometimes it's also about age, experience, and family position. Recent research also suggests that family living arrangements, such as living with parents or parents-in-law, can significantly affect how much influence women have in household decision-making. Now, is this unique to China? Honestly, I don't think so. If you're watching this from Russia, Britain, America, or many other countries, you may be smiling right now because your family works in almost exactly the same way. Plenty of husbands around the world joke that they need to ask their wife before making a decision. Maybe China isn't completely different. Maybe it's simply a little more visible here. And maybe Chinese people are more comfortable laughing about it. So after living here for more than 20 years, do I think China is a hidden matriarchy? Not really. I still think it's more accurate to describe China as a society where public authority and family authority don't always look the same. Men may hold more visible positions of power in society, but inside many homes, women often have an enormous amount of influence. And I actually think that's a much more interesting story than simply calling China patriarchal or matriarchal. There's an old saying, happy wife, happy life. After all these years living in China, I have to admit, I think there's quite a lot of truth in that. But what do you think? Am I right or am I completely wrong? Who really runs the family in your home? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe and join me for more stories about China from a foreigner's perspective.